So for the Distant Mirror project, we chose to do our project on immigration reform through the lens of history. John Marcucci, Jackson Lake, Garrett Smith, and Gerald Seawack. So the problem with immigration in the United States, it seems to divide people politically. Some Americans believe that immigrants steal jobs, while others believe that immigrants are an integral part of the U.S. Workforce. Others argue that there's a lot of ethical concerns behind the immigration system. So the reports of children at the border being separated from their parents is brought this immigration reform into the light of the news. Citizens have demanded reform in this system. So even though this looks like a 21st century issue, the debate over immigration has existed all throughout American history. And also by looking at history within immigration, it can offer some solutions that we can use to move forward and better our immigration system in this country.
So after all of our expert interviews fell through, we decided to interview my Aunt Charlotte, who's a resident, or Charlotte Bynes, who is a resident of El Paso, Texas. So she lived there her whole life, and she said that the biggest change is that when she was a kid, there was no wall, and that she could see people coming in and out of Mexico at any time. And she never really thought about the issue over illegal immigration as a kid. And she also said that the wall is pretty stupid, and saying how the wall is only a few miles long and the rest of it is either empty or just wired fences. And she also says that there is an underground tunnel system that is used to put in illegal immigrants into the country and the drug cartel. So she said the wall doesn't really do much. She also stated that before the Trump administration, a lot of illegal immigrants felt hope that they could be a part of the country, but because of the racist comments said by that presidential cabinet and organization, a lot of people felt scared that their own neighbors might turn them in. She also said that a bunch of industries in her community rely on immigrant labor, and how much damage would be created by an attempt to insularize and cut immigrants out of that community. So some historical context: in the beginning of the country, most of the immigrants were Anglo-Saxon and German descent, but because of the Industrial Revolution, with the new job opportunities, famine, and genocide, a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, and Ireland started flooding the East Coast. Also similar to the West Coast, a bunch of Chinese immigrants came to work on the Transcontinental Railroad and other job opportunities. Now, the rise of immigration caused a lot of debate between the American citizens. Business and factory owners believed that the increase of immigration was a positive, and because it brought a lot of cheap labor to their work in their factories. However, a bunch of Americans felt that the immigrants were coming from inferior parts of the world and that they should be canceled out. And this led to the development of nativism and an increase in the KKK. So to try to control immigration, the U.S. put a lot of acts into motion. One was the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1880, where it banned all Chinese laborers from entering the country. Now, this act was passed because a lot of unions, for example, Dennis Kearney's union, were complaining that Chinese immigrants were taking away their jobs that should belong to U.S. Americans. Now, this act would not be repealed until 1953, and this was the first time in U.S. history that the government banned a certain ethnic group. And then the Immigration Act of 1921 restricted a certain amount of immigrants from each country to enter the United States, so like a quota system. And this act racially favored Western European countries than Eastern European countries and other parts of the world. And 3 years later, with the Immigration Act of 1924, the restrictions of the quota would become much more stricter. And this quota wouldn't end until 1965 as part of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. Now, after that, a lot of immigrants from Latin America started coming to the U.S. because there was no more quota system, and that trend of a lot of Latin American people coming to the U.S. can still be seen today.
All right, so now for some past proposals that have been enacted or not enacted. So Ronald Reagan signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act into law in 1986, and this proposal gave amnesty for illegal the United States 5 years. And after failing twice, it finally passed in 1986 because it included increased border security, the creation of the I-9 form for employers, which helped verify the status of their workers as legal or illegal, and new laws which prevented employers from discriminating against foreign workers, regardless of what they look like or where they're from. And this act formed the basis for America's current immigration system, and almost 3 million legal immigrants became American citizens, many of them from Mexico, and now they form an important voting bloc in the American electorate. And it's interesting to see how a conservative Republican like Ronald Reagan favored amnesty, and how that contrasts to, say, Donald Trump's policy on illegal immigration in 2016 through 2020, or 2017 through 2021 during his presidency as a Republican as well. And then in 2007, George W. Bush proposed the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act, and this consisted of a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants looking to become law-abiding American citizens. It included an identification card for foreign workers in order to prevent workers from overstaying their work visas, which was a major problem and contributed to a lot of illegal immigration, with people overstaying their green cards. And additionally, the bill called for thousands more Border Patrol agents, as well as hundreds of additional miles of fencing on the U.S.-Mexico border. And this bill was actually struck down in the U.S. Senate due to lack of Republican support, because they thought that giving amnesty to a lot of illegal immigrants would encourage more illegal immigrants to come to the United States.
So another prior proposal that we focused on was Biden's U.S. Citizen Act of 2021. This is a very recent enactment that he has been working on. So it's one of the biggest changes in immigration policy since 2013 under Obama, with the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act. Right now, the Biden's U.S. Citizen Act is providing pathways to citizenship, strengthening labor protections, prioritizing smart border controls, and addressing the root causes of migration. And he hasn't been able to enact all of these policies yet, but right now he has been signing into effect executive orders, 3 of which are an inclusion of illegal immigrants in the census, a reduction in anti-immigrant sentiment within the government and also within the United States as a whole, and the creation of a task force to prevent this child separation at the border that has been all over the news in recent times.
So as much as we focus on the problem in the past history, the fact remains this is a problem that has yet to be solved. And I think what a lot of these problems have been trying to convey across is that America both needs a large number of immigrant workers and needs to prevent wage growth, stagnation, and too much strain of its services by having too many people come into the country too quickly. So our solution consists of 3 parts. First is to increase funding for existing agencies dedicated to immigration. Next is going to create a new system to help immigrants find jobs, transportation, and housing. And finally, it's going to establish sensible limits on immigration that are updated from year to year. Now let's get into the first one. So the first one to benefit under our plan is the USCIS. And this agency is responsible for legal immigration, citizenship, and green card applications. In May, they had a $1.2 billion budget shortfall, and they nearly forced to lay off a great majority of its employees. And this underfunding has resulted in a 4-month backlog in biometric cases. And if you're trying to encourage legal immigration rather than illegal immigration, it's not great if your department in charge of that is so far behind. So part of what we're doing is getting more money to the USCIS. So they don't have to rely as much on fees and more on just government appropriations. But 2 more bureaus that are probably going to benefit under this plan are the Census Bureau. And I think they need a lot more money since they don't have a good sense of the size of the undocumented population. They may be off by as much as 10 million. But if we give them more money, we can get an accurate count. I think it's very difficult to assess the problem when you have no real idea what the dimensions of that problem are yet. Now, ICE would also receive more funding, and I know that ICE is quite controversial in the media. However, it remains kind of a main agency in controlling the border, in controlling the spread of legal immigration, as well as apprehending immigrants who commit crimes. And so for both these institutions, I see increasing funding as increasing their effectiveness, as well as we can have an ability with that increased funding to kind of restructure them and reform them to best serve the needs of immigrants and the nation. But after that is done, we need to create a proactive government policy on jobs. So there's been a lot of sites that have dealt with job applications, Indeed.com, ZipRecruiter, and others, and they've shown that it's very effective to concentrate job offers and applicants in the same place. I believe that a government-run site could be very effective, given that government has the superior information. And by directing immigrants to there, it solves one of the main problems facing those immigrant communities is that they don't have quite the documents that we have to put on their resumes. And it's going to be very difficult to transition to a country without that kind of resume put forth to get good jobs as you enter the nation. And the reason that a lot of businesses will buy in on this plan is that they're very reliant on immigrant labor, particularly large farming corporations like Cargill and Ingredients. As much as half of their labor force, it's immigrants, with a fifth being made up of undocumented immigrants. There's going to be a lot of buy-in from these companies into this new program. But in addition to jobs, they also provide transportation and housing, which are kind of one of the two other main obstacles to immigrant success. In fact, 60% of illegal immigrants are concentrated in just 20 metro areas. This overcrowding is not really good for anything in the U.S. economy. It only leads to high demand in other places, while increased strain on services in the places where they're overcrowded. In addition, we want to address some of the homeless problem among illegal immigrants and to try to give immigrants a real shot in the United States. And finally, once the immigration system is really rationalized, we need to impose some limits upon the number that can come in every year. Now, I know quotas do have a very nasty history in the United States, but they remain necessary to prevent kind of a general flood of immigrants at one time that would cause wage stagnations and problems within the American labor force. In addition, any limit that would take place would have to incentivize and encourage skilled workers as well. There's simply a lot of jobs that went unfilled, particularly in 2019. And while refugees are of an economic asset, humanitarian concerns are still important as the U.S. looks to move forward and finally solve this immigration policy. To kind of sum up our solution, we want to increase funding for existing immigrant programs. We need to then create a new program that's dedicated to jobs, housing, and transportation. And finally, establish sensible, reasonable, and one that's best calibrated to balance economic needs and immigrant needs in setting a limit for how many people can come in all at once. Thank you so much. These are our sources for project.